right, we'll get ourselves a little bit of a late start, though it's not as late as that clock says. I'm gonna try to remember to fix that because the bug's
Oh, 6, yeah, we're early.
So, that is our call to order. First up, we have approval of our agenda. We can take that by just consensus. Do we have any changes or modifications needed to our agenda? All right, sounds good. So agenda is approved. Next up, we have approval of the December 1st, 2022 commission minutes included in your packet. We'll take a motion second from anyone who was present at that.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Cecily. Is there a second?
I'll second
Second from Anthony, thank you. Any corrections needed to those minutes? All right, all in favor of approval as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. This brings us to the public invitation portion of our meeting. And I had other things I thought I might say at this point, but I don't know if I actually need to because I don't have as many people as I thought. This is for interested persons to address the commission on any items not on our agenda. So things that we haven't necessarily gotten on our radar yet, and it's not time for taking action on them, but just getting us to kind of think about them and figure out who we need to look into it. So is there anybody that would want to speak to us about something not on our agenda for today? Hearing none, then we'll go on to our business items. The first one of which is our Southwest Regional Trail and Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail Long Range Plan amendments. That's for Carver County. We have Tracey Kinney to present.
Chair Commissioners, thank you so much for stating the title. That's the hardest part. So hi everyone, my name is Tracy Kinney. I'm a senior planner in the Parks Unit of Community Development here at the Council. And today I'm going to be presenting Carver County's Southwest Regional Trail and Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail Long Range Plan amendments. This is going to go well. Marty Walsh, the Director of Parks and Rec, is in the audience and will assist with questions after the presentation. Okay, so both of these trails are in the southwest part of the regional park system. The Southwest Trail is an 8-mile trail, 8-mile long trail that connects the cities of Victoria and Chaska, and it also connects the Lake Minnetonka LRT Regional Trail and Carver Park Reserve with the Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail. And then the Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail runs along the Minnesota River and then connects to Three Rivers Minnesota River Bluffs LRT Regional Trail, which is in Hennepin County, to the city of Chaska, and then beyond to a search corridor of that same name. The Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail is home to the Seminary Bend, which is a natural feature that is rare and unique. And the trail also intersects with the Minnesota Valley State Recreation Area and the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. You may recall the 2019 amendment that changed the names of both of these trails, and then there was some ownership change between Three Rivers and Carver County of the Minnesota River LRT Regional Trail. This is also home to that area where the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, they have that land acquisition and trail restoration project on this trail. So lots happening in this area. It's an exciting area. So Carver County is amending both of these plans to reflect a name change and alignment improvements, as well as a few acquisitions. I'm going to change the slide. So here are the new alignments. The Southwest Regional Trails in red, and the Minnesota River Bluffs is in blue, the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trails in yellow, and you can see the new alignments in the dashed line types. So as you may recall, the Southwest Regional Trail had a tail. It curled around through Chaska, and previously it was that dashed blue line. So now it's going to be stopping at the beginning of the city of the beginning of the city. Yeah, the city edge there. So it's going to have a unique identity, as well as the Minnesota River Bluffs. It's also, both of these trails are going to have some new alignments and a couple of different acquisitions, which I'll cover later on in the presentation, and this is figure 1 of your business item. So Carver County and their planning team conducted an equity analysis as part of this planning process, and the team considered the populations within a 1 mile distance of both of these alignments. They conducted a number of pop-up events, but mainly they focused on the city of Chaska because there's a density of communities there that are underserved by the regional park system. They found a great population, a great residential community there that highlighted a number of these communities, which are populations of Hispanic, low income, and folks who are experiencing no vehicles. And so they engaged residents at the Riverview Terrace manufactured home community in Chaska, received some really good feedback, and that feedback then shaped the plan. Two big items to note is that both the engagement there and beyond the other pop-up events provided feedback that the connection between the Minnesota River Bluffs Trail to the city of Chaska was really important. People really wanted to get downtown to those business amenities like McDonald's. So the trail was realigned to better, more directly connect along County Road 61. And then also there was a number of comments about building more awareness of these 2 regional trails. And so Carver County is continuing their outreach programs as well as building in new wayfinding for these 2 trails. There's also a note, which you'll see on the following slide here, that there's comments about safety concerns along Minnesota River Bluffs due to the wooded nature and the change in grade of that trail. So Carver County also engaged their partners, their agency partners, and the broader public during the planning process. They talked to the cities of Victoria, Chaska, and Chanhassen, and generally they helped shape the plan as well, and they also provided letters of support through their boards, which are attachments in your business item. Overall, there are some great themes that came through the public engagement process that was highlighted similarly to the engagement, to the equity analysis, but a few other items here are that both of these trails are well used for recreation and transportation. The Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail is used by both youth and adults. It is considered unsafe by some folks, so that is something that Carver County is considering, and that awareness and wayfinding is still a consideration for both the Southwest and the Minnesota Bluffs Regional Trail. So now on to the development concept. So the overall, both the Southwest Regional Trail and the Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail are 10-foot wide trails that are separated from traffic, and they are mainly running within the right-of-way. So that's why you'll see here that there's really limited acquisitions. In segment 1 and 2, segment 1 connects the future connection of the Lake Minnetonka LRT Regional Trail, and that will be along the boardwalk. Segment 2 then continues on, and it includes both existing and new portions, but moves the trail more onto the right-of-way where there's more development possibility, and also includes a new trailhead opportunity that is cited for Cloverhead Elementary School. And moving on to segment 3 and 4, these are where the acquisition opportunities will be happening. The Southwest Regional Trail in segment 3 is going to be running along Creek Road, and this is a new opportunity to run that trail along the right-of-way or in the road the road itself, it may be decommissioned in the future, so it's a huge opportunity. There might be a few acquisitions along this stretch for trailheads, for natural resource restoration, and for acquisition, for access. And then this trail then connects with the Minnesota River Bluffs regional trail at, now it's escaping me what the road is. It's right there, Hickory Street, with a signalized crosswalk. So the Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail then picks up at that intersection. It runs both to the south and to the north. It runs southwest. And
Southwest Regional Trail.
yes, the Minnesota River Bluffs runs southwest and it extends to that search corridor, and then also to the new alignment then through the city of Chaska, which it picks up the railroad greenway right there, and then goes under Highway 41 with a future underpass, I think. And then the trail then transitions to Audubon Road, and then continues on to the existing corridor. So acquisition opportunities here are through the railroad right-of-way, and then acquisitions will be needed at the transition point onto Audubon Road. So the total cost to complete this long-range plan, both of these amendments here, is approximately $14.5 million, including $7.4 million for development and $7.1 million for acquisition, with $46,000 annually for operations and maintenance. And the table here before you is table 1 in your business item. These are the costs broken down by individual trails. So you'll just shortly, the proposed action, this is the rationale for this proposed action. The Southwest Regional Trail and the Minnesota Bluffs Regional Trail long-range plan amendments are consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, including Chapter 5, Planning Strategy 1, and other council policies. And here's the proposed action for your consideration today: to approve that the Metropolitan Council approve the Southwest Regional Trail long-range plan amendment, approve the Minnesota River Bluffs long-range plan amendment, and that require Carver County, prior to initiating any construction, new or updating of existing paths, trails, bridges, or any other construction project, to send preliminary plans to the Metropolitan Council, Environmental Services Interceptor, Engineering Assistant Manager. And with that, I will take any questions, and Marty Walsh is here to help take any questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Just to help me kind of get my bearings, I'm remembering when we were looking at potential legacy projects last month, there was one in the Minnesota River Valley area that involves some new bridges and boardwalks and things. Does that have a connection to this section that we're talking about, or is that somewhere else? That was a Scott County project.
It is a Scott County project. Sure, Marty might be able to talk to that, speak to that.
Mr. Chair and members, Marty Walsh, Carver County Parks and Recreation Director. The last meeting that you recall, Scott County was here presenting their request for river crossing from the south side of the river, and Carver County being on the north side. And so, yes, the answer to your question is, would that trail connect to this? The answer is yes, it would connect to the Minnesota River Bluffs Regional Trail.
Do so on our maps, just where? Since we don't highlight.
Let's see. I don't know that it's going to show up easily on
It's
this.
a green line, is the middle, Chester.
I think that's 41. So does this have a
I don't think it has a laser
laser on it?
Now I don't feel bad about feeling confused, he can't feel it.
So it would be off, I'm sorry that this doesn't have a laser on it. Where's the downtown Chaska area? So you can see the blue arrow that points along kind of a straight line off the far left-hand side, lower left.
Okay, right here.
Right there, that leads to the city of Carver, and that's where the connection is made. So it's off this map, that connection point, but your question is, does it connect to the Minnesota River Bluffs Region Trail? Yes, it just does not show on this diagram.
Okay, so right trail, just not on the part where we're looking at changes.
Yes.
That would be why I was confused, okay.
Chair, I think that Scott County has gone ahead and they're using a new name for that trail. They have to formally change it, but I think they're calling it Biennium Junction
Yeah, it's called the Metropolitan Junction.
Regional Trail. I think they have it, but they'll get there.
They'll be back here just like I am asking for.
Right, Cecily.
Do I need to use a mic?
There's mics in the Zoom.
I think
That's just
not.
for presenters.
Oh, got it, okay.
Yeah,
'cause I
because
know
these work for us.
Oh, how about
Cecily.
that?
Yeah.
That wasn't my question, though.
That's it.
Looks like a great project, connecting, important trails. But one thing I noticed in the cost table, it was kind of interesting that the development costs are 7.4 million and the acquisition costs are 7.0 million. And I know that this is a long-range plan, and I was curious how you value the acquisition costs. Is it based on an appraisal or what you've talked about with the owners of, like the railroad and the other owners of those segments?
So good question with regards to and most of the acquisition costs are related to that railroad corridor.
Okay.
And so we do have I'll say an appraisal that is on that same corridor, not in that location. But that is the basis for some of the value, if you will. I would like to mention this, so you bring up also the cost, if you will, for the system. The majority of, I'll say some of the land acquisition costs, particularly on the Southwest Regional Trail, will be achieved through development. And so as the cities of Chaska and Victoria go together, those cities will use their land dedication for parks and trails as a way to accomplish that. The other thing that should be recognized with regards, again, we come up with these values for what trail costs are, but the regional system seldom, I'll say, experiences the full cost of what these are, because oftentimes agencies are seeking other grant funds. And that, again, for most of our trails, it's been grant funds from the federal transportation programs for trails, and then supplemented with parks and trails funds as the local match towards those programs. So the cost is one thing, and it's a moment in time, but also recognize that there's other funding that comes to the table.
On what you just said there about the park dedication for development, the county actually gets some of that?
No, we work with our city partners, and they follow the plan. Hopefully they'll follow our acquisition plan. So as developments come in, we have a chance to comment on it, but we are not the land use authority in the incorporated areas. So we can work with our city partners to accomplish the overall trail line.
Oh, so it may be that cities end up paying for some stuff that will later be managed by the agency?
Yes, they may ultimately acquire the property and actually have the trail constructed, and at some point in time, we would enter into a joint powers agreement that may transfer some of the responsibilities to us.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious about the robust wayfinding program that's going to improve awareness and placemaking. What sort of activities are you planning there, and what new innovations can we bring to other agencies?
Well, that's a great question. We have a pilot program in the area right now with some wayfinding signage to bring people back and forth from Chaska to Carver to Victoria on these alignments. And right now it's kind of a pilot program to see how that all works. The other places in which we are doing wayfinding would be at trailhead locations. And so as Chaska continues to develop, part of their development ideas is to actually have, I'll say, wayfinding incorporated with new buildings. That's for instance, there's a library facility that they think, okay, this will be a great opportunity for not only restroom facilities, but also potentially for information for people to access the trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw also the mention of connecting to the McDonald's. Is there interest perhaps in linking up with local businesses that provide some of those services?
Exactly. So the again, in this portion of Carver County, there's a high percentage of folks that do not have vehicles. And there is not a separated trail that gets them to both McDonald's, not only because of the convenience of having something to eat, but it's also a work destination. And so there's a grocery store, for instance, that's would be just off of the trail, and then other convenience places. And the downtown area is also what I'll say is a place for employment. So it does aid in all of those aspects.
I guess I'm just seeing that as a potential gateway to broader trail understanding and connectedness, is individuals realizing that this is a replacement for a highway and that it can be the thoroughfare for your life if you wanted to. So I was curious what sort of, whether it's employer-employee relations, commuting benefits, whatever that looks like, what sort of interactions you had with private businesses there?
To be honest with you, I don't know that we had a lot of what I'll say is private business interaction. It was more of I'll say public interaction. And then their response back to us that, we'd like to be able to get to the downtown area. We'd like to be able to get to these convenience locations. Another convenience location is the pharmacy, it was part of Walgreens and so forth, all located in that area. But there wasn't, I'll be honest with you, I think we had a lot of direct business conversations about that, but more, again, just public interest.
Okay, thanks.
Speaking about both that and the cost question, and I saw there's a connection to an elementary school, do we have any idea whether we're anticipating for acquisition development costs to be able to get some from either transportation grants or the Safe Route to Schools program?
Those are all good grant opportunities, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
So it should be eligible for some of that kind of stuff. Okay. Okay.
Is there, so this is, so that the equity analysis, we've identified the same community, actually, same people. So question around how, is there something that also increases that community's access to this system? I don't know, I just think there's something about building awareness internally, kind of building the value of it. Or they see it's there. Is fear that just all wooded areas are off limits and we should get, did you do any deeper investigation into that? Is it just language? Is it, I'm just curious.
I think there is some barriers just with regards to I think people's familiarity.
Right.
And again, we're with regards to the Hispanic population that we spent a fair amount of time with, they don't seem to go out and venture very far from where they are living.
Right.
And so that is a bit of a barrier. And to be honest with you, I think again, it's what they were familiar with, potentially with not living there and now living there, and then being exposed to I'll say the natural environment more so.
Well, so is there a way that you all are starting to mobilize the effort around that? Because I think because of what I would say is that they're not using it, or not as a result more than the thing, you know what I mean? And I would venture, my experience on Lake Street is that immigration interaction drives a lot of how you see the world and move in the world, and I'm gonna, you know what I mean? So I think, is there a way that your team, that you kind of started this outreach, you're developing the trail system, is there something that you do that actually invites, enlists, informs? Free Bikes for Kids has a huge event out in that area now. They may be a great, actually an immediate partner, and I don't know if they already do this, but making bikes available to those communities. Just is there some things that you all are taking, because I think this is great information that you all pull together in that, but is there something that programmatically that supports the development of the bike village system? And you got a couple years, right? When is this gonna be done?
Well, overall, this is a very long-term plan. So when is it going to be done? I don't think you can give me a good answer.
Well, that's kind of my point. I'm just, so not only it doesn't exist, so there's an opportunity to build a relationship, do something that's happening parallel to this, right?
So the
intersectional.
A couple things there, Anthony. So we do work directly with the mobile home community there for, honestly, outreach activities and exposing youth to outdoor pieces. through the school district. You mentioned the bike program, and that was actually, they do have a trailer with bikes that was funded through the SHIP, State Health Initiative Program.
Improvement program.
Program. And so I'm not quite certain where they're taking all the kids to, but they are working along those lines. And then, you know, you and I talked earlier about our relationship with the school district, and that's how we've been making connections to folks. It's largely through the school district and then bringing outreach to the school or directly to their community.
Right. And so on the trail too, going along 5, does it go into the Arboretum?
Okay, so we're shifting gears, so that's a different trail alignment.
Right.
So the Trunk Highway 5 regional trail does go directly into the Arboretum.
It does go in. And so at one point, they were also making an investment in e-bikes. Did they finish that? And is there something you all are doing around bike share or anything that may be really, because that could be really, because I do think it's really cool that people do want to get into the city. I think this is a super practical route for people who live out there to get to stuff and the long stuff. And so is there any thoughts also as you all build this out to think about bike share? And I know they were making a big investment in e-bikes and maybe it fell apart, but
When you
e-bikes.
say they, do you mean the
I'm
Arboretum
sorry,
itself?
the Arboretum. In Africa, it was it you? Was it, who was making it was, I think it was Arboretum was actually making an investment and there was an RFP for e-bikes.
Yeah, I cannot, Mr. Chair, Anthony, I cannot speak to that.
Well, we just say it's true. But you know, I mean, just looking at that, I think it, like, again, there's people who live out there, a lot of what they do, like you said, practical stuff, Walgreens, Target, you know, those centers are out there. So there's a possibility of actually using it for transportation as well as recreation that is kind of unique, so. Just looking at those, that's something around, like bike share, I know that's a big deal, but have you all thought about it practically?
No, we've not had a conversation about bike share.
Anyone else? Or anyone want to move us along to anything else?
I move the long action that we had up there. Sorry.
You're making me read.
That.
Okay, we have a motion for the proposed actions from the staff report. Is there a second for that?
Sure, I'll second that.
Second from Cecily.
Proposed action.
Is there any, so, now I have to read it. That is that the Metropolitan Council, 1, approve the Southwest Regional Trail Long Range Plan Amendment, 2, approve the Minnesota River Bluffs Long Range Plan Amendment, and 3, require Carver County prior to initiating any construction of new or updating of existing paths, trails, bridges, or any other construction project to send preliminary plans to the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services Interceptor Engineering Assistant Manager. Is there discussion on that motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor of the motion as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is approved, thank you.
Thank you, Chair members. Ms. Tracy.
I wanna see this person's business cards. Metropolitan Council Environmental Services Interceptor Engineering Assistant Manager. That's a great title.
I bet it's all acronym.
Poop masters. Alright, that brings us to our second one. The Big Marine Park Reserve Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Award for the Reibel property in Washington County. Jessica, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Jessica Lee, Park Planner of the Council, and I'm here to present business item 2023-10, Big Marine Park Reserve Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Award for the Reibel property in Washington County. Big Marine Park Reserve is located in the northern part of Washington County on Big Marine Lake in the St. Croix Valley. There are currently about 200 acres open to the public, and the park is popular for swimming, fishing, and boating. The park reserve will be nearly 2,000 acres when completed, with 80% of the acreage set aside for natural resources protection, including high-quality upland and wetland wildlife habitat. To date, the county has about 800 acres, as shown by the parcels shaded in green. The Reibel property is shown on the right, outlined in blue. This property was purchased by Washington County in 2022 through the use of eminent domain. The undeveloped land was a crucial inholding, nestled between other county-owned parcels and having over 150 feet of shoreline on Big Marine Lake. In 2018, the county made an offer to the landowner based on an appraised value. The landowner declined the offer, and the county knew it was important to acquire the property before it was developed in order to protect the lake and the natural resources present. So they decided to pursue eminent domain. The county followed council procedures in notifying staff of the pursuit of eminent domain and in requesting consideration for future reimbursement through the PAF program. The total cost for the Reibel property was $866,125, which included a purchase price of $675,000 and eminent domain costs of $186,000. The grant amount requested is $649,594, and the county will provide 25% local match. Our rationale for recommendation is that this acquisition is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, the Big Marine Park Reserve Master Plan, and Washington County is within its $1.7 million per fiscal year limit for the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. So with that, our recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council, 1, approve a grant of up to $649,594 to reimburse Washington County for the acquisition of the 1.22 acre Reibel property located at 14621 Margot Avenue in Scandia for Big Marine Park Reserve. And 2, authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. And with that, I'm happy to take questions, and we also have Sandy Brewer and Sharon Price from Washington County in the audience that will assist as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's been a little while since we saw one like this, so just some reminders, or possibly first time some people have seen this. The two things to keep in mind for this kind of thing, just there's some weird timeline bits. Even with our other sorts of acquisitions, it's possible for park agencies to get reimbursement later on as long as they requested it up front. And then similarly for the eminent domain piece in particular, we have an extra piece of policy that says you need to make sure you let us know before you start that process for it to be eligible, which they did. So that's why we can get a business item for something that started 4.5 years ago, which is the only part that's limited. So questions? Jeremy, you look puzzled. Is there anything?
I'm just trying to understand the policy implications of using eminent domain instead of voluntary acquisition, voluntary sale for acquisition opportunity fund.
Sure, there's, and this is something that we had talked about a bit in our last, or possibly prior to that, update of our Parks Policy Plan. And essentially what it comes down to is there is a political decision involved in eminent domain, and we believe that the primary place that that's appropriate to happen is in the elected boards of the park implementing agencies. So for the most part, we treat it like anything else. The park implementing agencies have to go through various other hoops and things like that to pull things off on their end, but for how it comes to us, it's pretty much the same. I'm trying to remember if I remember I made a motion about some things that was completely shot down, and I was trying to remember what it was. It had to do with, I think, saying something about certain fees being eligible or not. And I think we ended up just saying that everything was eligible, I believe, was the outcome of that. I don't know, does staff have, was there a particular language you were trying to find?
I'm just thinking about the name Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. It doesn't seem appropriate when it's a takings. I just, in terms of policy objective of that fund and eminent domain, seem, in my mind at least, to be at odds. I don't have my policy guide with me here, unfortunately. And so the only guidance I have here is, the 3-2 match. So I was curious, in terms of purpose for that fund, if eminent domain sullies a bit of that public interest associated.
I can give you the summary of A, if you wanted to change that, it would be something to bring up next time we read our
It's already on my notes.
And B, that having any question about that was wildly in the minority the last time we considered the topic. For whatever that's worth.
Okay.
Like, yeah, we did bring it up, but it was heavily in favor of saying that yes, sometimes eminent domain has to be used and we're okay with that. We had extensive discussion about it, but that was essentially where we ended up.
Yeah, I guess my thought on it would be principally that if there are voluntary sale projects that are not going to be funded because this one is, that would be problematic. But since they're not banging down the doors,
I
maybe
think
we're
that's
okay.
basically exactly the point that I made, and I couldn't even get anybody to second my motion.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So,
It'll be different this time.
and yeah, because this is our one competitive fund, that's the one thing we thought about,
Yeah.
but yeah, that, yes,
That's all.
Cecily.
Well, I'm not generally a fan of eminent domain myself, but I'd love to show Jeremy on a much larger map, if I might.
Sure.
It's
This isn't
the
gonna show up on
parcel,
camera, so
the
that right?
third one here.
Yeah.
And if you look at, and I met with staff today, and they were very helpful in answering my questions. You know, and if you look at the master plan, or if you're at all familiar with, you know, the county park, which is open to the public, which is over here, there's a DNR launch right there, which is what I use for paddleboarding and kayaking, you know, which is really kind of this part of the park. So if you look at sort of the master planned area and where this parcel is, it makes a lot more sense to me.
Sure.
You know, in general, I don't like eminent domain, but in this case, you know, if you start adding more houses or other developments within a park, master plan boundary, what happens? You know,
Yeah, it's concerning to me is all.
right?
But I get that it's an in-holding and the 150 feet of shoreline is now going to be protected.
So what you're getting at is not so much about this parcel in question, but what other parcels might exist possibly from other agencies, that
Correct.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of this one in particular, especially the, what they're saying about where it's currently undeveloped and things have been getting built along that, it makes sense for the timing.
And Tony, I don't know if you think, I think when it came up before as well, is there some aspect of this where there is us having some confidence in the implementing agencies? Which is amazing to me, honestly, Jerry. We look at these plans and they have a plan for acquiring, once this, and Big Marine is a great example of a lake that used to be far away, but now it's down the street. I mean, it really
It's down the
is.
street from me.
It's down the street from downtown St. Paul. I mean, it really, and so what's happening is there's something, I think the implementing agencies, one, in terms of they're keeping tabs on developmental energy, like what's happening. And they mapped this out a long time ago in terms of that we really want to acquire Big Marine. The thing, when I read eminent domain makes your stomach hurt, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and it was really funny, I thought I was gonna go, so I wanna know what happened out in that community when it happened. Was there any community response? I mean, I'm more interested in that, was there any community response? Because this had to happen in a public forum with people that are politically engaged, because they all have an acre of land, you know what I mean? And so I was really interested, was there any public response? But I just remember the conversation, and as a newbie, that when that was going on, I was really at that point thinking, is there some aspect of trust we have in the implementing agencies work to get it to here, to get to the point where there's the decision made that if this does not happen, and right now the developmental pressure around Big Marine Lake, I would say that as someone who is out, there is pressure, right? This is, and it is interesting that this happened, like that's what this wasn't on the radar, right? And I just said, so they did eminent domain. They exercised eminent domain to get this, and was there a community response? Are they paying attention to the developmental pressure? And now we have to have this relationship where at some point we have to have some trust in that. And they have to do this in a public forum as well. So I think that, I remember the conversation and thinking, is that part of it for me, right? Is there a part of it in terms of my relation? And we have a very engaged, commissioner as well, that's helpful, right? I think your thing relative to the use of the funds for acquisition, using eminent domain simultaneously is interesting. Like Tony, that is an interesting mix of it. But I do think that in this case, there's something about the ultimate goal, of how we're creating these contiguous offerings around publicly accessible land in places that are within 30 minutes of our largest populations, right? And I think that the regional system we have does some of that really in a unique way. And so this one in particular, when I read it also, I thought that, and I think this is interesting, and that you called them, which I think is really cool too. I think that's probably the best part of the story is our commissioner actually called, talked about it, and walked away with a relatively good, with a good feeling about the way that it was exercised. And so I just remember being really young and new in the process and thinking about it the same ways, but feeling like, okay, we've got it. Our relationship with implementing agencies and our relationship with what they're doing is valuable, and we have to leave that open enough for them to do that when it feels like it's important.
You do also make a good point about the public process for it, because for anyone who hasn't looked at it before, there's a bunch of state law stuff that governs how that works, and quite frankly, the process requirements for that are way more robust than anything that MPOSC does. So there's a bunch of things that they had to meet to pull that off. Cecily?
Yeah, Anthony, so after I read the information, I Googled. I moved to Minnesota 3 weeks before this happened. So I wasn't aware of it. And if you Google it and maybe go through a few screens, you can find, the county board meetings, you can find the agendas, you can find the decisions. But I could not find links to the local newspaper. Country Messenger is our local weekly. Didn't find anything in there. I tried to look up Scandia, council meeting information, but I didn't see anything in there. There's information about this individual, of course, because he was the one who ended up, selling the property to the county. So I don't know if there was a big hubbub.
I can also, since you just said this, it wouldn't be Scandia, this is actually Town of May.
Oh, it's in May?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are some things there
It's
about it.
not, I think that.
There's actually some
Sharon-
very old
Especially in
things
the
about
city
it
of
too.
Scandia.
Yeah,
It's
I
in
thought it was
Sharon City,
Scandia.
City of Scandia.
Am I thinking about a different person with the same person?
Well, Square Lake
I
is
might
May.
be, they own more than one parcel.
Still Scandia.
It's just right outside Marine, not very far outside Marine.
Okay.
Well, but Cecily, I think you bring up an interesting point, and I don't know, maybe, Jeremy, as we get around to this in 2040, is there, I don't know, just that engagement has become something that is really tied very seriously to equity, and there's people, everybody shows up with the list of every brown person within a mile, is there something related to this in terms of eminent domain, or the use of those funds that we also talk about and talk about engagement in those strategies as well? Is there some way that we, I think from our perspective, by the time we see stuff, is there something that we can talk about relative to engagement in eminent domain or aspects of that? Because I do think that was the one, I do believe that the public forum aspect of it is really what's critical, right? And that's really what we've been testing in many of those things. Did you talk to the community?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's, that's really the ultimate litmus test around the work we do. Are you working in community, and are you talking in community and making people aware and inviting them in, not just posting it in a place where nobody looks or, whatever that is.
The pioneer press that just gets flipped.
Yeah, exactly, what are those things, but I don't know, I mean, again, I think that the idea of the public process, right, and the informant and inviting in, and those elements of it feel valuable and important and relative to the use of public dollars, right?
So I think I want to avoid getting too far off on a rabbit hole there. So I will try to fill you in on some context of what I can remember from the last time we talked after this. But as far as what's before us today, with how our current policy is written, this meant all the stuff we had in there, and then I can kind of let you know more about what we discussed before and why, so we can think about that in context. But with what we have for our current stuff, it does meet all of those things, so are there any more things that are kind of more specific to this particular business item?
I guess for me, I see these PAOF projects come in each agenda, but there's not really a holistic overview of how the funds are being expended.
Mhm.
And so the thing that's giving me heartburn about whether this is pushing something else that perhaps even more closely meets the need, that isn't resolved. Taking it one business item at a time. I don't know how far out we have forecasts for likely applications for these funds or what sort of emergency state they tend to arrive in, but it would be nice to have a little bit of projection, foresight, or budget associated with those funds so that we could place it in context, I guess.
Sure, and
May I attempt to?
yeah, we can get some things, but before you give your answer that I know some of, I will also mention that regardless of what may be coming later, this is currently defined as a first come, first served fund. So even if we saw something on the agenda later that we liked better, our current policy doesn't let us do anything about that. It would just be knowledge only. In terms of knowledge, what can you give us?
Thanks, Chair. So right now we have, I think, over $10 million available, because we got another couple million back in July with the legacy. So we have a lot of funding available. I'm only aware of one coming in soon. I do work with a couple agencies on long-term acquisitions. Generally when they're larger, they're several years in the works, so we do kind of know if those are coming, and I know of two larger ones that will be coming. As it stands now, there's plenty of funding for those. This one we, of course, knew of a few years ago. Typically, the smaller ones, we find out about them a couple months before you see them. Agencies are always working on little acquisitions here and there that come up when they can. So I would say that it's the larger ones that are going to use the big part of the money that we work with in advance on. So I would say at this point, like, the forecast is good. We have funding available. Of course, opportunities can come up that you have to act on quickly. And we do have some things in our policy plan that allow for accommodating those as well, if there were to be no funds available. So I don't know if that alleviates any of your concerns or not.
No, that's good. I appreciate your indulgence. I like to learn more about our role, and it's helpful to have the information.
You probably said it, and I've already forgotten since we've been talking about other things. Did you actually, well, you said it. Do we actually have the balance if this goes through number in your report somewhere?
Chair, we were asked to take that balance out
Okay.
in previous business items, so it is not in there.
Was it in your presentation? Is that where
It was not in the presentation.
There's
I
sometimes
normally
there,
just
so-
give a verbal
Okay,
amount, and I forgot to
Was-
get that for this meeting, I apologize.
okay,
Last time I checked, it was over 10 million.
it's 10 something, all right. Anything else? Or anyone want to get into motions?
I'm glad to. Move the proposed actions.
Okay, we have a motion for proposed action from the staff report from Cecily. Do you have a second for that?
Second.
A second from Anthony. Any discussion on that? Do we have any questions for our county staff that are here? They haven't come to the table yet. Do we need them for anything? Oh, I suppose I should state the question while I think about that. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $649,594 to reimburse Washington County for the acquisition of the 1.22 acre Reibel property located at 14621 Margot Avenue in Scandia for Big Marine Park Reserve, and authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. Discussion. guys are actually being quiet. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries, thank you. I don't know if you guys will have to take off, but I can either fill you in after this meeting about some of that other stuff, or we can talk later, whatever's more convenient for you. I have no idea. That moves us into information items. Our first one up, we have, going back to talking about Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, the FY2024-25 Biennium Projects Overview and Equity Highlights, Part 2, continuing from our previous one last month. Jessica and various funding agencies, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Again, for the record, Jessica Lee, Parks Planner, Council. I'm going to co-present tonight the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund 24-25 Biennium Projects Overview and Equity Highlights, along with Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, Anoka County, City of St. Paul, Ramsey County, and Three Rivers Park District. And this will be a little bit of a repeat for some of you that were here last time, but the purpose of today's presentation is to present the proposed Parks and Trails Legacy Fund projects for the fiscal 24-25 biennium. Last month, we had 5 agencies present, and the remaining 5 will present tonight. A little background on the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund. It was created to support parks and trails of statewide and regional significance after the passage of the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment in 2008. The council receives an appropriation each biennium for the regional park system. These funds are allocated to the regional park implementing agencies based on a formula driven by O&M shares, population, and non-local park use. The estimated funding for the regional park system for the next biennium is $52 million, and of course 10% of that will be set aside for the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund program. So the agencies submit a list of potential projects in preparation for the upcoming legislative session, and as a note, these projects are subject to change due to final funding allocations and our appropriation language that authorizes the agency boards to select the final projects. So as a part of today's presentation, agencies were asked to identify which projects are designed to advance equitable use of the regional park system. And now I'll pass it over to staff from Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Chair Uruso and Commission members. My name is Adam Arvidsson. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. I'm going to take a few minutes to go quickly through the 9 projects that we're proposing before you and then do an equity highlight on one of those. One thing I want to note at the top is that all the projects that we put before you, both in the legacy funding format and also with our state, our regional bonding projects, are all selected through a set of equity metrics that the Park Board designed and implemented and are codified in ordinance. So the projects that are here before you are there because they meet certain equity metrics. We're not picking projects in any way other than that they're scoring in a certain way on our equity metrics. I'm happy to talk more about that offline if everybody's interested. I won't go into the details now. But you can see there are 9 projects. They do span the system, but there's a bit of a concentration, especially in the north side of Minneapolis, and in particular on what we consider to be our 2 unfinished regional parks, which are the Grand Rounds Missing Link and Above the Falls Regional Park. Under our equity metrics, those parks get funding every year until they have substantial completion. And then you'll notice the Loose Line Regional Trail, Shingle Creek, Theodore Worth, and Victory Worth are all north side projects that have not seen significant investment over time. And then we move into projects like Chain of Lakes and the Mississippi River Gorge, which also rank high because they are some of our most visited parks and also have significant access opportunities. So the Gorge and Chain of Lakes, for instance, have the most transit access in our system, and that is another way that a park can rank highly. So those are coming into our requests for that reason. The equity highlight that I'd like to talk about is the Loose Line Regional Trail. So the Loose Line Regional Trail is an existing regional trail, but it has a, let's just say, highly convoluted and difficult to follow route. So this is a trail that exists in North Minneapolis. The sort of lakes that you see there are Worth Lake and Bassett Creek, the ponds within Bassett Creek. So that's Theodore Worth Park there on the left-hand side of that drawing. The existing Loose Line Trail follows that yellow line. Three Rivers Park District and my friend Jonathan Blaming behind me have a really great streamlined loose line trail which ends abruptly at our parkway and makes you jog all over the place in order to get down to the Cedar Lake Trail. You can see if you can try to follow that yellow line through North Minneapolis. It's hard to do. However, there is a continuation of the rail line that we would like to eventually acquire. And so that red line is the master planned vision for the loose line regional trail, which would create a much more logical way to get from the western suburbs to the Mississippi River. Specifically, this area here, Bassett's Creek, specifically was the historic dividing line between North and South Minneapolis. It is where the addresses change, it is where the city council wards change, and where the park districts change. And of course, it is no accident that it is there. You notice that Harrison on the north side is 71% BIPOC and Bryn Mawr is 11% BIPOC. So we are talking about a deliberate governmental dividing line in a lot of different ways. I mentioned the extremely convoluted trail route that does discourage use. This is the fourth lowest visitation in our entire system in terms of regional parks. And considering what it connects, I think that there's opportunity there. The new route would connect north and south to each other, north-south Minneapolis, because the rail line actually wanders back and forth across that creek. So you will inherently connect these two neighborhoods together. The route will be safer and easier to navigate and better connected to those communities through which it runs. In addition, it more closely follows Bassett's Creek itself. So the community will be better connected to that water resource which runs through North Minneapolis. So the route itself, I should note, also is the result of focused engagement during a master planning effort that we did that looked at all of our north side parks. That engagement actually included a focus group on the Bassett Creek Valley, as we called it. There were both regional and neighborhood parks that were discussed. And the Harrison neighborhood and Bryn Mawr neighborhood jointly convened those focus group meetings. So it was a really great way to kind of bridge that historic divide and bring together folks with very different life experiences to envision a new trail route. And that's why we say that this project, we believe, transforms an historic barrier into a community connector. And so we hope that the railroad continues to cooperate with us and that we can eventually acquire and implement this property through Parks and Trails funding and some other funding sources as well. That's the end of my presentation.
Yes, that's
Do I
the
need your chance? Oh,
We might
sorry,
have a question.
I know we're gonna pause for questions as we go
Did I hear
through.
you say that the loose line already exists in its entirety?
Yes, it is.
Really tell if it's dots or a solid line.
Yeah, Chair Russo, Commissioner Harris, the Loose Line Regional Trail does exist. You can ride that entire yellow line. But some of that yellow line exists on street. Some of it is, there's a portion of it that's a trail that's basically right alongside Highway 55, which is a really horrible ride. And you have to kind of get up and down across several road bridges. Many of them don't even have curb cuts, like the Glenwood Avenue. When you follow Glenwood Avenue, there's no accessible way to follow this trail. So it does exist, it is signed, it is a regional trail, but we think we can do a lot better.
So when you have the red alignment in, what happens to the yellow alignment? Do you just pull down the signs or do you keep some of it as a non-regional trail?
Yeah, Chair Russo, Commissioner Harris, we wouldn't remove any trail segments. They would
Okay.
become local trails within our park system.
Okay.
So one good example is sort of in the middle of the drawing, you can see that the red line is sort of south of Bassett Creek and the yellow line is north of it. And so that parkland area is a neighborhood park called Bassett Creek Regional Park. We would preserve that trail as a local trail in the local park, but we would re-sign that streamlined route as the regional trail itself.
Remember when we saw the master plan amendment for this come through? This is Linnea Atlas Ingebrigtsen's area, essentially. This is her kind of home turf. So we heard a lot about that. And so elsewhere, in terms of what's complete, loose line is sort of three different things. There's bits in Minneapolis, in Three Rivers, and under DNR jurisdiction going further out. And the Three Rivers and the DNR portions are all on the actual railroad bed, and Minneapolis is the one that's not, so that's the funky bit, so it's loose line is complete, but it's not on the like loose line. Yeah, but I like this because it's one of the like most obvious kinds of equity things, like so much of the time where we're talking about equity, we're like, well, this probably helps it kinda, it'll be hard to measure, we don't, this is just like, there was historic like redlining right here, let's make some bridges across back and forth so that it's less broken up. I love how straightforward it is. It's such a relief compared to most of our equity stuff that's complicated. Anything else?
The statistics on the lack of use between Theodore Worth Park and the northern is so glaring because it is so much easier to just take the street.
Yeah.
Like you'd literally rather put your life on the line than stay on the loose line trail. It's just, so this is, so it really is.
I did a few times.
Yeah, so like you just go, no, I love this meeting.
Thank you, Adam.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Blaska, Park Planner for the Biennium County Parks Department. And we are gonna be focusing on 3 projects for the Legacy Funds. First one is the Bunker Hills Regional Park improvements. Generally taking care of what we have, so a lot of roadway trails, boardwalk pavilions, and playground reconstruction. Mississippi West Regional Park, Riverwick Trail, that's the neighborhood the trail runs through. It is in disrepair, it's probably the worst trail in our system, so we'll be getting that taken care of. And then our natural resource management and system-wide management that we do for that all throughout the system. And so our equity highlight is actually the Bunker Hills improvements. So it is kind of taking care of what we have, but while we're doing that, we want to better serve youth, seniors, and people with disabilities. And then we've done other engagement that has shown that people want easy access to parks, inclusivity, and engagement with the natural world. So as we're doing these projects and doing the design, we'll be updating, of course, all the ADA things. It's amazing that missing one little sign can make a whole, parking stall non-compliant. So go through everything in the park and get everything updated to ADA compliance. Work with, we've got 2 partners, parents, 2 parent groups, one for kids with disabilities and then one for kids on the autism spectrum. And so we're gonna be working with them on the playground redesign, and so we'd really like this new playground to be inclusive, and they will help with that design for that. And then engagement while in the park. The photo just shows a sign with some additional information. We're also working on an augmented reality trail. And so that should, some improvements with that trail will happen with this project. And Nikki Greenwell, our marketing person, is actually gonna be back next month, right? Next month to kind of tell you about that, because it's a really kind of cool project. So those are our projects.
Okay. When you were halfway through, I was thinking if Todd were here, he was gonna ask you about autism spectrum inclusion of the playground, and then you said you already were covering it, so
Yes, yep.
that's perfect. Any questions? Yes, Jeremy?
Were camping improvements part of Bunker Hills, or is that separate?
That is gonna be separate. Do you have suggestions?
I'll attend the public meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Did you just go camping there and have some thoughts?
No, I remember that coming up when I visited with the commissioners for their meeting.
Okay,
And so I was thinking about that as I was looking at this project list.
okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Paul Sawyer. I'm staff with St. Paul Parks and Recreation. And I'm thrilled to be here to talk a little bit about our projects. I'll walk briefly through what we're thinking for each of these and then talk about our equity focus. What I do want to note is that for a number of these projects, even though we haven't specifically elected an equity focus area, that's not to say that many of these parks aren't in BIPOC communities or have visitation from the BIPOC community or other groups. It's just we're emphasizing when we put a focus area in that there is some aspect to this project that is being done in partnership with a particular community or maybe has a programming aspect that's specifically targeted, and so we're trying to focus on where that is happening. And so to talk a little bit about our projects, for those of you who have been down to Harriet Island, you may know that the Riverwalk along the river extending from the pavilion there is in pretty rough shape. I believe that facility is a couple or a few decades old, and it's in need of redesign. That's a heavily used park for events and for large gatherings, and so trying to look at refreshing that space. You've heard many times from our staff about the implementation of the Hidden Falls Crossing Farm Regional Park Master Plan. There's some exciting work that's happening specifically on the Crosby Farm side of things with the boardwalks and trying to improve the trail network down there, as well as preparing for the River Learning Center project. Month or maybe 2 months ago, you heard Ellen Stewart from our staff talk about the cultural landscape plan at Indian Mounds. This will fund continued implementation of that work. At Phelan Regional Park, we are beginning to think about a way of transforming that park to be a regional destination for paddle sports, to really emphasize that non-motorized water recreation, and so this will be the first step in kind of conceptualizing what that will look like in the park. Also at Phelan, MnDOT is planning a project along Trunk Highway 61, which skirts the western edge of that park, and so we're taking this opportunity to reconfigure the entrances into that park for some pedestrian safety, and just kind of making that a little bit better with the US highway along there. Point Douglas I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, but we were very thrilled to hear that we received $5.5 million in federal transportation funds through the most recent regional solicitation to implement that project. This commission approved the master plan earlier, now a year ago, and so this will be our opportunity to begin the implementation phase of that. Likewise, Samuel Morgan Regional Trail also received federal transportation funds through a previous round of the regional solicitation, and so we will be reconstructing the westernmost segment of that and then the segment that runs through Lower Landing up to Indian Mounds Regional Park. We also, and this is the first time that we have had this project on there, we are looking at trying to do longer range vegetation maintenance contracts. With the droughts we've been experiencing and other factors, it's been tougher for us to get native vegetation established once we're doing projects, and so we're trying to extend out those maintenance contracts for 5 years so that we have better success in getting that done, so that takes when we do those projects. And then the final three are the programming grants that we have brought every year in the past, funding the Great River Passage work in all of our riverfront regional parks, the volunteer and education coordinators that primarily are doing work at Como Regional Park, and then operating the shuttle, which alleviates a lot of the traffic congestion and makes the entrance much safer for folks that are coming in through non-motorized means. So to talk about the equity highlight, and you may have heard some of this when we brought the master plan forward, but we began the process of this, or the community engagement process for the master plan right as COVID set in. And so that was a very interesting challenge for us to try to regroup our efforts and do engagement at a time where no public meetings were happening. And so we did at first a survey out in the community, and the responses that we were getting back were largely from a single demographic of homeowners along the corridor. And we knew, for example, that there's a large Somali community living in a series of apartment buildings about a mile from the trail, and we were not hearing anything from them. And so this was an opportunity for us to do a deeper dive with that community to see how that they can benefit from this trail. And so when we reached out to community leaders, one thing that we found was there was a strong recommendation that we do more verbal person-to-person outreach. And so to kind of move forward with that, we had the survey that we had been conducting online translated into Somali, and then working with some community leaders and some of the community businesses. We actually went door to door in some of the apartments to administer the survey, to have that survey available at the businesses right in the heart of that community. And so we had tremendous success in hearing what the community needed from this trail and just generally from trail access in their neighborhood. And the themes that really came out was safety was an important one. If you're familiar with Lower Afton Road, there's currently a trail along it, but it's a very hard barrier and it feels very unsafe for folks that are trying to either get from the north side to the south and the south side to the north. Battle Creek Rec Center is just north of this area. And we've heard in the past that access to that rec center, which is their neighborhood rec center, is difficult because of how dangerous Lower Afton feels. And so safety was a really important theme that came up. And so specific safety improvements have been proposed for the implementation of the Point Douglas Trail to allow families to get down to that trail and use that safely. Accessibility also, both in terms of just making it ADA accessible, but also providing a safe continuous path that connects those residential areas down with the trail. And then as well as multilingual signage so that folks that are not proficient in English are still able to wayfind, are still able to utilize that trail. And so when we move forward with the initial phase of design, we're going to reach back out to that community and dive deeper on some of these themes, but they certainly were reflected in the master plan and will be the core of what we do as we go to implement that trail. So, happy to stand for any questions.
With respect to that Somali community engagement, since that's a relatively recent immigrant community, I'm curious, before you even got into things about the suggestions for design and issues and things like that, what portion of them were already even aware that the trail was there and available for their use? Do you have a sense of that?
So the Point Douglas Trail itself, the only extant segment of that is quite a bit south of that area. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a trail right now that exists along Point Douglas Road. Everything that's happening is on street. And I will say too that in terms of safety, and we mentioned trail lighting here, is there's most of the stretch is completely unlit except for whatever light spills over from the trunk highway. And so there being no sidewalks, no formal facilities here, no lighting, it really is, we're starting from scratch. And so the community is not getting down to that area right now. I can't speak specifically to how they're using the trails in Ramsey County's regional park, but I can at least say anecdotally, because this is my neighborhood, that I know that use is happening and that the community is on that trail, but I don't know to the extent how much the visitation is happening.
That's pretty much the answer I expected. I've heard some feedback from people about this trail, And the only ones that I've heard mentioned have been like pretty serious commuters kind of stuff using it. So if there was any answer other than that, I was going to be stunned and pleased, basically. So I was curious whether anyone was like. And some of that also might come down to some of the other things we talked about in terms of, just engagement about our broader things and wayfinding and stuff like this. Like, could we get to a point where even when what's on the ground is either not there at all or pretty junk, when we went out to do a public engagement thing, say, hey, we'd like some feedback on this stretch, could they at least be ready to say, oh yeah, I saw a thing on a sign saying that something was planned in that vicinity, right? Like, could we have some sort of simmering awareness that there either is something there or it's on our long-range plans, or you might hear more about this at some point kind of a thing, so that it's not totally from scratch, even when it's basically from scratch. Could they be like, yeah, we went, like 3 years ago, I went to check out what that was there so that I would know what you were talking about when we had this conversation, kind of thing. Is there a way that we can do that kind of thing somehow?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, those points are well taken, and I will say too that I think the origin of doing the engagement and actually preparing the master plan for this came from the failure of the Fish Hatchery Trail just north of here. And so that brought a lot of community attention to this corridor and how people are currently using it. And we saw that it was a search corridor, a regional trail search corridor in the policy plan, and so decided that the time was right to think more holistically about this entire stretch while trying to get the Fish Hatchery Trail back open as soon as possible. But I don't think that immediate residents of this trail had really thought in much detail about this street could be better, it could be improved, and so that's kind of what we were hoping to bring to the community and get feedback on that.
And that's exactly how it came up, because I had some friends that were talking about it, and they were dropping references to like the regional trail and the Fish Hatchery Trail. I'm sitting there going, there's no such thing as a Fish Hatchery Regional Trail. So I went poured through documents, like, oh, there's a corridor. Oh. But yeah, that's interesting.
And that segment is used, right?
Heavily, yeah.
Heavily, that segment is used, but I think the interesting thing that you brought up relative to the families' use of the recreation center as a central destination and as a, like I think that's the part that is really, as you develop this plan, there's actually a reorienting of all of this relative to their uses. Because I think in most people who use it, it runs from Burns to Bailey, right? And it's what you do to get out to Washington County, right? I mean, it's like that's, matter of fact, it's funny, if you look it up, you'll see that Washington County highlights it as part of, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
They literally, it is, I'm not even kidding, you look it up and you'll see. So Washington County almost sees as this Point Douglas Trail as a connector, because it's the way, if you're gonna go out there, taking Bailey, getting out through to Bailey, that's the best way to do it, really, right? And, but it doesn't connect to the way the community lives right now. And with the new amenities Ramsey County's new amenities at Battle Creek, and, but between the school, Battle Creek, relaunches, and the rec center there, in terms of families' lives and family engagement, it really could be important. So I appreciate that you all identified that by talking with them, because had you not actively reached out to them, that would not have been highlighted. We would have had the same information we had, and they would be telling you to close 61, right? That's what all the bikers want to do, is close. But yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, Commissioner Taylor, I appreciate that comment. And the other thing that I'll say that we have seen is, in these neighborhoods here where there is a lot of gaps in the sidewalk network, our Public Works Department at least has seen projects where they've proposed sidewalks, there's been initial pushback. And then after they're installed, we've heard from the community anecdotally that it's like, I get to see my neighbors when I'm out walking my dog, and there's this cohesion that's developed as a result of these projects. And so while this is an important commuting route, I don't want to lose sight of that family aspect and what it can mean for the community.
And it's hard. I mean, you have to be strong to ride from Vento through Lower Afton up the hill, and then on Upper Afton is kind of a bike lane. Like if you just would take that all the way to Century or something, right? I mean, so anyway, I think that as you all reorient that and think about it, there are just so many natural connections in terms of the way that people are living versus the commuters, and so we need to supply both, but that location itself is really interesting. Just what's happening around the park and the schools and the rec center and what's happening between, even what's happening between there and, are we changing the name to Indian Lawn Park? I'm just
Yeah,
Not yet, they said they were
just like it's
working
time,
on
I
it.
can tell it's
Yeah.
time, my mouth wants to change the name now.
Yeah, they didn't
But
tell us what
anyway,
they're
but
changing
that
to.
itself is also a connector if we do something right. Like if we do something right there, we're gonna have a connector all the way through there into Battle Creek. And that is also a route that people live on, and then, anyway, all that, there's something there. And then connecting all the way over Phelan, right? So,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Chair Uruso and council commission members. I almost upgraded you guys. My name's downgrade. There you go. My name is Chris Lankowski. I'm the Director of Operations on the Parks and Trails side of Ramsey County. Thanks for letting me talk a little bit about our projects. So our first three projects here are things that we ask for every year. They're programmatic. So the volunteer coordinator at Tamarack Nature Center, which is our equity highlight, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Our outreach programming, which focuses pretty heavily on outreach to BIPOC communities, getting folks out doing biking, archery, fishing, now winter sports, and some nature education. And then our conservation corps, which helps out at our garden at Tamarack, as well as doing natural resource maintenance and work throughout the county. The next piece is our off-leash dog area improvements. So our off-leash dog areas are much used, much loved in the county. We have 3 of them in the regional park system, and those improvements are probably, are mostly focused on trail improvements, but there are some amenity improvements included, potential, water access, restroom access, that sort of thing. The phase 1 of the Bruce Vento Trail Extension, obviously the Bruce Vento exists currently, but there's a phase 1 and phase 2 plan for this trail extension. We also got some federal dollars, $4 million federal dollars to do a small extension of this. And so this is part of the cost share that extension would go from Berkeley Road to Hoffman and Highway 61. And then regional park trail and sign implementation. So the first part of that trail implementation is happening this spring with map and rule sign combo on our kiosks, including partnership with Met Council, doing some welcoming art above those signs made by 5 different BIPOC artists, so we're really excited for that installation to go in. And then this is a continuation of that to get signs installed in terms of the trail posts, wayfinding, the monument like entrance signs as you come into the park. And then Tulu courts. So we have Tulu courts over at Keller Regional Park. For those who aren't familiar with Tulu, it's a traditional Hmong top spinning game, and we have courts there now. And I think what we found is something really interesting, which is that different municipalities throughout the country are making really great improvements to their Tulu courts. And so players are traveling to these different areas and saying, hey, but look at what they're doing over here, and look at what they're doing over here. So there's some energy within the Hmong community in particular to continue to make improvements to the courts that we have at Keller Regional Park. And then there are site infrastructure accessibility upgrades in Battle Creek Regional Park. That's a lot of taking care of what we have and maybe some additional improvements, a lot of parking lot work, that kind of thing. And Regional Park Playground redevelopment, which is basically replacement of playgrounds as they age. And then our equity highlights, so our county board has put a real focus on racial equity, so we talk a lot about that, but we thought this was a great opportunity to highlight the volunteer program at Tamarack and the age and ability equity initiatives there. So our volunteer program has a really, is fairly robust, and there are some really dedicated people who volunteer there. And anywhere from seniors, they're assistant naturalist volunteers, they connect young student visitors to programs like pond dipping and cider making, and some of these volunteers are so integral to the operations at Tamarack that they feel almost like staff members, right? They're there on a weekly or almost daily basis. They're integrated into the fabric of the nature center in really great ways. And then we also have youth volunteers. Our JAN program, or our junior assistant naturalists, are a huge part of our summer day camp program. That's 14 to 17. Even beyond that JAN program, we have kids doing cider making. They'll come, families will come and volunteer for maple syrup season, that sort of thing. So that's really exciting. So that volunteer program really spans from an 8-year-old up to 70 or 80-year-old. And then with our community garden programs and our animal care programs, we see some really exciting engagement with folks with physical and mental disabilities, and taking care of plants, taking care of animals. That's a really, that can be a really healing and restorative thing for people with various disabilities. So those are just a couple of the exciting things that are happening at Tamarack with that volunteer program. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Ramsey County? Okay.
Nailed it. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Christopher is always a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Jonathan Blaming, Associate Superintendent for Planning and Design at Three Rivers Park District. Before you are a fairly lengthy list of projects proposed for use of legacy funds for 24 and 25. 11 of those fall within the category taking care of what we have. And another 2 are for creating opportunities, and then 4 are really about connecting people with the outdoors. So for the 11, taking care of what we have, it's a laundry list of things that we need to do to make sure that all of our facilities are in good shape. There's micro-surfacing of several regional trails as well as in-park trails, replacing of some in-park bridges, updating the campground at Baker Park to 50 amp from 20 amp because 20 amp no longer cuts it. We have outages on a regular basis because people are plugging in too powerful of things at their site. We need to secure the envelope of the field operations center. It's at end of life, both the roof, the windows, and the siding. And the operations center in Highland Park needs renovation. We need to do some interior work there to make the bathrooms ADA compliant, as well as make it more functional for staff. Highland Boat Ramp access road, that used to fit code, it doesn't anymore, and we need to replace that thing. We need to make it so the boat ramp itself and the fishing pier are ADA accessible, and that's a complete rebuild there. So there's 11 projects there. For creating opportunities, this is the last of the legacy asks for Mississippi Gateway Regional Park. We are preparing to go out to bid with our board's blessing in a few months and hope to start construction later this year. The construction of that park, it's a complete park rebuild. And that will start this year and should be done by the end of 2025, the grand opening probably in June of 2026. That includes a Gateway Center, which is an environmental education center, as well as a visitor center, as well as a center for teaching folks outdoor recreation skills. There will be a treetop trail running along the tree canopy of the bluff overlooking the river for over 1,000 feet. There will be a mini Mississippi play area that kids, of course, can play in as a water feature. Some complete redo of all of our picnic areas, making many of them non-reservable. First come, first serve, because that is a need. And we're also partnering with Brooklyn Park on their side of the road, putting in a dog park, an archery range, a reservable large-scale picnic shelter, and a regular playground. And by partnering with them, that allowed us to have more upland area, because a lot of the area of Mississippi Gateway is actually within the floodplain of the river, and you can't put things like that down there. The other create opportunities is Bassett Creek Regional Trail. This is the final segment of the Bassett Creek Regional Trail, running along Golden Valley Road through Golden Valley, and basically connects into Minneapolis, and it would allow residents of the area to bike all of the way or walk all of the way to French Regional Park, and then to also access 170 miles of our regional trail network. The thing I'm really excited about in all of this, well, I get excited about rebuilding stuff and doing micro surfacing. That's pretty cool, you know? Especially if you're into longboarding, which I'm not, because that's a good way to break a bone at my age. But micro surfing is cool. But what's really cool is connecting people to the outdoors. We have 4 projects listed within this category. Sohaki, let me talk briefly about Sohaki Park. Sohaki Park is an old wetland turned into a dump in Robbinsdale and Golden Valley. And it's full of a bunch of Minneapolis street project waste from 60 years ago. And nature has taken it back. It's just amazing how nature can reclaim stuff. We were asked in 2015 to partner with the 2 cities and to try to create a regional presence within these communities, because, you know, the whole first ring of cities around Minneapolis don't have regional parks in it, other than Teddy Worth, but we kind of think of that as a Minneapolis park. And so we started off with Sohaki in 2015, promptly got bogged down in the Bottineau LRT alignment, which would go right through, and the Bottineau was going to stage in the park, and so we kind of had to put everything on pause there. And well, Bottineau has now found a realignment, which makes more sense because there's more people, and we're starting to move forward to Sohaki, and we're putting in an education center. It's actually a one-room classroom, along with an outdoor pavilion for outdoor education as well. Right in the center of the park, we're doing that. We're starting design this year, we'll build next year, we've already funded it. We're also on the hook for over $1 million of improvements to water quality for the 2 lakes within that park. They're essentially storm ponds, but they can be so much more. And it's a really interesting idea to take a storm pond, and it's never going to be swimmable, but it certainly can be better smelling and clearer and host aquatic life that the kids can then learn about through dip netting and things. And so one of the projects is to build boardwalks and build learning stations and access to this water. Another thing at Sohaki, and I was asked a long time ago by the mayor of Golden Valley, we need sizzle at Sohaki. And we have this really cool park called Silverwood, and it's all about arts and the environment, using arts to help connect people better to the environment. And so the sizzle at Sohaki is essentially an extension of the idea of Silverwood with interactive art installations that instead of building a playground, plastic, metal, woo. This is really about more nature-based activity art installations. And we hope to kick that off, and we'd like to use legacy money to help with that. Another project, partnership we started prior to our Parks for the People initiative was the Crystal Mac Nature Area, and that's also on this list. That's a 40-acre wetland immediately adjacent to the Crystal Airport. It's owned by the MAC, but there's an agreement, a long-term agreement with the city of Crystal and now also with us to operate it more as a place to go and explore nature through a boardwalk. And this is the third phase of boardwalk development. When done, we'll have a 0.7-mile round-trip trail through the wetland with observation decks and learning stations. And it's a really interesting neighborhood. There's a lot of low-income households, it's very diverse. And it's not in any master plan right now. And neither is Oaxaca. And that is one of the last one in the list. Am I on the right list? Yes, I am. Master plan recommendations for improvements in programming. We're in the middle of the Parks to People Master Plan, or the first tier initiative, as it was originally talked about. And I believe I mentioned this to this group before. I would love to have the opportunity to bring in our planners who are leading the Parks to People Master Plan effort to talk about what they've heard, what they've learned, where we're going in next steps. And we expect that initiative to wrap up with a draft master plan we probably see late summer of 2023 this year. So none of these things qualify yet for legacy funds until we get that master plan done. And we recognize that, but it's our understanding when talking to staff that it's okay to put it in, we just can't do any agreements for anything unless they're in the master plan. So we do hope to see Oaxaca and the MAC identified within the Parks to People Master Plan as bridging facilities. And I fully expect that we're also going to see a heavy emphasis on programming within the first tier. It's really about bringing services to as close to where people live as possible, using the local parks as satellite regional programming centers. And that's what I'm hearing from the planners for this. It's not about building stuff as much as it is about programming and developing relationships and building trust, building these relationships, and then using those as launch pads to bring people into the nature-based outdoor regional park system. So I can't tell you exactly what the money for that segment will be used for yet at the master plan. And kind of already did my equity spiel. It's the Parks to People Master Plan. And so there's 11 cities, the southern part of Brooklyn Park, all the way down to the eastern part of Bloomington. Bloomington's cut off by 35W. There is a strong difference between West Bloomington and East Bloomington, as well as North Brooklyn Park and South Brooklyn Park. So that's why we cut them off where we did. And it's the old donut hole issue. Minneapolis, St. Paul got developed. The regional park system started after the baby boom generation and the explosion of development that followed World War II. And regional parks were not developed within the first ring suburbs for the most part throughout the metro. It's a donut around the core cities. And this is really an attempt to address that and to improve our level of service to historically underserved populations within this donut hole, this area that lacks regional facilities other than regional trails. With that, I'd be glad to stand for questions.
I don't know if this is necessarily a question or even something that needs to be answered today, but I remember when we put the bridging facility stuff into our parks plan, we had no idea what that might be. We're just like, let's kind of make a placeholder and figure out what it means later. And now we're getting some examples of what that could actually be. And you said something interesting there with some parcels that are actually owned by other people, and you would be doing some stuff there. And while we definitely intended the bridging facility stuff to be largely about programming, I seem to recall there being some question about legality of involving like actual ownership of real estate and whether that was going to be required. And so we might have to dig in to see, is there anything that we have to do special to make the actual ideas that we're getting work. I have no idea what this concern was or what we determined about it, but just because elsewhere, park implementing agencies own and operate, and here, if you're doing operations on something that somebody else owns, does that throw a wrench into any of our stuff?
Chair, it's my understanding that it would if we were talking about use of Met Council bonds or state bonds.
Okay,
We'd have to file some sort of restrictive covenant on the property where physical improvements were made. Legacy doesn't come with that restriction. That's the beauty of the Legacy Fund, it's much, much more flexible. It can be used for programming, it can be used for capital, whereas bonding is strictly capital.
so it was a limitation on our capital dollars. That makes sense. Yes, Anthony?
You know, and I think, that actually, this is super clever. And I think actually when we first talked about bridging facilities, what I remember was this challenge around programming. And that we were really looking at this idea of what are the things that happen that actually start to build skills and confidence and competencies, you know, in communities that didn't have the same history, and get them to take a step out a little further as well, and that there was a really conscious bridging. Like I think that I feel like that was one of the things that we were really thinking about, was that ideas, and maybe maybe it was.
We definitely wanted them to do programming things, we were just trying to figure out how we were legally allowed to do it.
That's exactly right, and I think that I feel like we were trying to open a door to find a way to start to answer that question of, great, you built this place, but what's the complementary programming that goes along with it? And for all the regional parks as well, that we're not, I mean, Minneapolis has a really, as a regional implementing agency, has a place in the city and a place that's near, and then those kind of, so I think the commission should really get some interesting credit for thinking about that, and you for finding a pathway there, you know what I mean? So I think that really is positive.
Is he your hand, Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it car charging at the Baker Park Reserve that's causing the problem?
No, it's RVs.
RVs.
RVs
Running
are,
50 amp
most
service.
newer RVs are 50 amp, and then they put a converter on to turn the 20 into a 50, and it doesn't work very well, and it blows the system.
That's wild.
Good to know.
Yeah.
And they just keep doing it.
I'm used to tent camping, so I don't know what this is like.
Same,
I just bought a travel trailer, so I've been learning all about this problem.
Okay. That's a whole nother world.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all for you? Okay. Thank you. All right, so that brings us on to our next item, which is an information item about the Summit Avenue Regional Trail Long Range Plan, process check-in and opportunity for advice.
Bring extra chairs.
I know we have a couple people from the community here, there's probably more online, so I also want to give a little bit of just context about who we are, what we're doing, and what this is at this stage, people that might not be familiar. There are multiple layers of things that happen, and we're only one of them. So this body, MPOSC, is an advisory body to the Metropolitan Council about the kind of big picture park planning and policy stuff for the 7-county regional area. All of the actual parks and trails get owned and operated by a park implementing agency, what we were talking about just a moment ago, which is things like St. Paul, Ramsey County, Three Rivers Park District, things like that. And so we create a giant policy document that's called the Parks Policy Plan, which is what we were talking about when we referred to the eminent domain stuff. And then the implementing agencies go out and do all the kind of legwork for individual unit planning. There's a master planning process called long range planning, so we'll get to that. And that's where most of the actual community engagement and public hearings happen. So we're happy to hear from people to some extent here, but this is not a public hearing in that sense. We asked some agencies a year and a half ago, hey, it'd be nice if we had some check-ins earlier in the process, just kind of hear what you're finding out about. So this is just a very informal thing for us of kind of let us know about things that we might be interested in and might offer some advice on. And then later we have a formal stage of, does whatever you're proposing meet the requirements in our policy? And at that stage, it's pretty much just a, yes, it does, no, it doesn't. We don't coordinate the getting general feedback from the community about what they'd like that happens within the implementing agencies at the stuff that they do elsewhere. So this, just to give people a sense, this is not a like, we end up taking a bunch of comments from the general public, line out the door, all that. This is just us checking in with one of our implementing agency partners, kind of seeing what's on the table and seeing if we have any comments to help them out and that kind of thing. And we have a few people here, so go ahead. We have Tracy and Alice and Mary and anybody else, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Commissioners. Once again, my name is Tracey Kinney, and I'm a Senior Planner in the Parks Unit of Community Development here at the Council. And I've been working with the team at the City of St. Paul as they prepare their long-range plan for the Summit Avenue Regional Trail. So the reason why they are here today is to talk to the Commission about their planning process that's currently happening, and then to talk about their opportunities and challenges that they're having, and then to gather some early input from the advice from the Commission prior to their final submission, which is going to happen later on this year to the Council. So with that, I'm just going to let the
Chair,
team go.
Commissioners, Andy Rodriguez, Director of Parks and Recreation, pass it over to you.
Chair, Commissioners, Alice Messer, Manager of Design and Construction.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, Mary Norton, Landscape Architect.
And with that, feel free to take with me.
Awesome. Appreciate the time today. Appreciate the time to get feedback and comments from you on the draft master plan of a possible regional trail on Summit Avenue. As you all know, this project has garnered a lot of attention, both in support and opposition. Before we turn it over to Mary and Alice, I want to recognize the design team and our public works colleagues on the engagement and in-depth work that they've done over the past year and a half on this project. Being responsive, going out of their way to really engage community within the immediate Summit Avenue, but also the broader region. You'll hear more about that in a bit. But with that, I will turn it over to these two for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. As an introduction, the Summit Avenue Regional Trail Long Range Plan here, about a year and a half process that we're in as a status. We recently completed a 60% draft document that's available to the public and a public comment period that was out available. So we're at a turning point here where we are going through that process to refine changes, priorities, and want to give you an update here at this turning point. So the project introduction, this is really a great opportunity. Summit Avenue Regional Trail as a search corridor. This is that process that we're going through to identify the feasibility, issues, opportunities, constraints, and really start to look at if a regional trail facility were along in this corridor and then in Summit Avenue, what can that look like? What can set the table for future implementation? We absolutely want to hear and have heard from a variety of perspectives locally and regionally on it, as Andy mentioned, certainly many in support, but many in opposition as well. Certainly a complex project and complex issues to resolve, but we've really worked hard to find a balance in the design. We think that that can meet a lot of those needs and concerns. And really making sure that we're in accordance with that regional park policy plan. So as we work through each of these issues, making sure that what we can develop is in line with other regional parks. And really this is an opportunity as a parkway to take what's a local bikeway and elevate that into the regional system, regional network throughout. And so you'll see a few images here, I think really that touch on, again, this idea of this parkway experience. It is a designated parkway in the city ordinance, and this is just such a great opportunity east-west across the region to really, again, bring that into that regional fold. In all seasons, you can see what a pivotal role that mature canopy and the tree canopy takes in this corridor in creating these rooms, these spaces, and we're looking to come to be sort of tangential to that in this trail and bring that experience that currently is on street to something that can be more accessible and more comfortable experience for users who want to bicycle in this corridor. So again, kind of all seasons get to use really special places throughout this corridor that people, many people come use Summit Avenue as it is and we wanna come alongside that with even more access with a separated facility. So again, just that importance of that east-west connection across the city. From a regional parks policy perspective, we're really looking at connecting the Mississippi River Gorge Regional Park to the Sam Morgan Regional Trail via Summit and Kellogg and Eagle Parkway. And so what you'll see here, the graphics, or what we've focused a lot on throughout this process is really that Mississippi River Boulevard to Kellogg, where that cross-section doesn't exist or isn't currently planned for. But that segment along Kellogg is planned for as part of Capital City Bikeway or the existing cross-section on Eagle Parkway. So that is all part of it, but we've focused a lot on that cross-section that doesn't currently exist. So talking a little bit about the project purpose, again, a notable parkway within the city. It has been an important civic thread since the late 1800s. It is a designed landscape, so it's laid out, the roadways, the boulevard, that pattern in the landscape, creating those public spaces has been a part of it as it's from its conception. And so we're really at a moment in time where we're looking at the evolution of the roadway and what three kind of buckets that, why now? Why are we talking about this now? Why is this important? There's kind of three areas that really are coming together as part of this process. One is that long-range planning lens. So we see the Summit Avenue Regional Trail corridor as part of the policy plan, city's comprehensive plan. And we're also looking at, the city is doing a bike plan update as well as part of public works. So there's a lot of planning efforts that have recognized this important east-west connection. The second is user experience. When we work through engagement, and even before this, we heard a lot about the proximity of modes of people not feeling comfortable necessarily on the current on-street bike lanes. So accessibility as well. So people not being able to physically access that on-street bikeway year-round is an issue, and that perceived comfort kind of being a barrier for families that kind of trying to meet that 8 to 80 use in the Summit Avenue corridor. And I mentioned seasonal conditions. And then the third is coming together here is existing infrastructure. So the roadway itself, many portions of the roadway have not been reconstructed in almost 100 years or more. So there's a point in time in which that roadway needs to be rebuilt, and the time in which we need to start thinking about what that design looks like as being planned for reconstruction. That was really the catalyst that started us really making those connections with public works to say, okay, we have a lot of long range ideas here. We also need to this roadway needs to be reconstructed. So let's look at all of those pieces together as part of that puzzle. So just to illustrate those on-street conditions, and again, reiterate what we've heard a lot from community members about, if you aren't using Summit Avenue now as a bike lane, why not? It functions for many very well, but for many it doesn't, and these are some of the barriers that people experience when they're biking. We've heard a lot about dooring and the potential for that risk, or people moving when doors open, things like that. Year-round maintenance, so the on-street bike lane sort of positioning bicyclists between a through travel experience and existing parking is problematic, and the comfort of that experience for many people is not of interest. The timeline, I mentioned we're kind of at about a year and a half here, so in October 2021 we kicked off our engagement in working through that process with the Twin Cities Marathon. We've had a variety, it's been a very multifaceted approach for engagement. We have had many in-person events, attended events. We launched the Engage St. Paul platform, which was an online way that we could have a few ways for people to map their ideas in the corridor, which was extremely helpful to start to see where people have problems currently or want to see improvements in the corridor, where those priorities are. So that was a great real-time tool. We also were kind of in between when people were transitioning back to in-person events of the pandemic, so it gave an opportunity for people to participate more accessibly that way. So through my time, I'll speed it over.
No, I
That's
meant,
okay.
that's when they turn the white noise machine
Oh,
off.
right. That's good timing. Okay, no,
You're
it's
gonna hit the buzzer there for a second.
I did too. Oh, it's good. That was throughout the summer. We had these series of virtual engagement, public information sessions. We had an open house in the fall, which was well attended at Hidden River Middle School, where we had, I think, almost 300 attendees come and work through kind of what was going to be in the 60% master plan. So have continued to see, again, of that variety of strong opposition and strong support of the idea of a regional facility here. And so working through that. So as we pivot towards February and 90% draft, we'll have another public comment period to review that draft before we finalize a plan. To touch on engagement again, there's maybe 4 buckets that have been consistent throughout in what we're hearing, and a big one throughout has been green space from the beginning, and really making sure that whatever we develop recognizes the importance of that tree canopy and the mature tree experience in the corridor, and making sure that we don't impact that negatively or put any additional risk on it than what is already there. So as a framework of design, you'll kind of see that we're really looking at that roadway pattern and paved spaces that exist as our opportunity to create this alternative transportation in the corridor and a paired example of one-way trail facilities. So trees throughout have been a huge priority. Facility conditions, so how will it be maintained, what's there now isn't functioning for people to be able to use it all seasons or extend that season because of snow removal, and paving. So we heard a lot about the paving of the road, right? Like people cannot bike in the snow, there are potholes everywhere. So that was a moment where we can really work together with Public Works to come up with a sort of near-term solution for mill and overlay and getting some surface improvements together while we work towards the reconstruction that's necessary in the corridor, which is a longer timetable. And safety, as I mentioned, proximity of use between vehicles. There are many vehicles, multimodal uses in this corridor, and so the perceived threat of safety there, and real concerns as well. I mean, I think over 10 years we looked at traffic data, about 3 per year, just for bicyclists alone were incidents of crashes in the corridor. So averaged about 3 per year that were serious or fatal. So intersections are really key to improving that and keeping that relationship as design develops through the roadway reconstruction. And then certainly no change. I think that it's important to recognize that for many it functions really well, and there's a concern about about maintaining it the way it is and the historic character that's there, and risk to if changes occur, what that looks like. So from the 60% feedback, what we're looking to focus on now, as we've gathered that feedback, is really to look at that user experience. So how can curbside activity and some of those logistics about in the design, what happens at that curb line, those faster cyclists, or culture of sort of vehicles, bicycles that will move kind of that 15+ miles per hour, where do those go in the corridor, and how does that work with other vehicle speeds? Clarity, I think it's a complex corridor. The geometry itself changes multiple times as you move through the corridor, and so trying to make sure we can illustrate what the changes are in a really clear, precise manner that people can visualize is something we're working towards as well. And then looking at other connections, so important connections of framework of why is Summit so important, and what other connections spur off of there that we need to recognize any gaps in future planning. I mentioned balancing complexities. This is a general layout of the corridor here. At one point in time, we were looking at two-way facilities and one-way facilities in the process as a way to sort of navigate the type of facility built and maintenance and some of those logistics about creating a facility. We're moving towards a series of one-way trails on either side of the road, similar to what's there now, but bringing those above the curb. For consistency in the experience as well as the construction build out over time, so that users won't have to transition from two-way facilities to one-way. And we also heard a consistent thread between folks who are opposed and in support of it is really the concern for that contraflow movement of two-way vehicles with many crossings. And so we think the one-way is going to really provide the most seamless trail facility. What you see on here is components of a transportation envelope, and I call it the transportation envelope because I think that goes back to looking at that roadway and looking at how can we reorganize what's happening in the paved surfaces to the extent we can to make way for this next layer of transportation and recreation. And so what you see here is essentially a reversal of where that parking occurs and where the bicycle facility occurs. So we're bringing that parking behind the curb with the buffer space depending on where you are in the corridor, that buffer could be either paved or green space, depending on availability. But generally speaking, that's at its core, it's a switch between that position of bicyclists to parked cars. And here's an example, this is a photograph east of Lexington, so to try and illustrate that next layer of complexity, there's kind of east of Lexington and west of Lexington, if you can think about moving through that corridor. East of Lexington, we have a 100-foot right-of-way, it's a bit narrower, and that's what you see here, where you have parking on either side and 2 lanes of travel in the existing condition. West of Lexington, we have those large boulevards and median spaces. So generally speaking, what you're seeing here, east of Lexington, where we're more constrained, is that we have essentially a 9-foot kind of treadway, so 6-foot with a 3-foot buffer there. And so there's an example, again, when parking does remain, how we can accommodate that buffer space to minimize conflicts and kind of what's happening there. As a hierarchy of changes, we're looking at, again, I mentioned those paved spaces, but also parking. So as needed, we'd be looking at reducing parking east of Lexington by about 50%. So recognizing that that space, again, to prioritize that pavement, making sure we're minimizing impacts to the boulevard, that's one way to achieve that. And looking at early studies or snapshot studies of parking suggest that it's underutilized corridor-wide so that we can be more strategic about where parking does occur. With that. What you see here is an illustration. This would be an example of that west of Lexington. So on the left-hand side would be that large central median, and which has one-way travel roadways in the current configuration. And so the red dashed line you'll see here is the existing curb line. West of Lexington, we move those curbs in. Our impacts are about a foot beyond the existing curb line there, 1.5 feet. And working with forestry, there's a little more latitude with those mature trees and where there's space relative to the curb that we think the risk is a bit lower and more manageable. So that's an example there, that buffer space playing a really pivotal role in, again, door swings, or curbside activity, snow removal, to really create that separation. This is an example, what we call the double median, if you will. There's a section summit where it splits and there's 2 medians, by McAllister College, Snelling area, where the trail currently goes up the middle. And so this would be an example of that, where you have that solid paved treadway, but with a paved buffer space. What you see here is another example east of Lexington, where you have that paved space. We heard a lot from community members about driveways and driveway concerns and how does that interaction happen. So this is an illustration of a driveway apron that would be reconstructed with a new roadway for that. And back to the timeline, so we'll pivot again in February to a 90% draft and continue working towards a final master plan to bring to the council later this year. That, I have questions, but I'll open up for dialogue or if there's anything my partners wish to add.
Okay, Cecily. Well, I'm a pedestrian, I'm not a cyclist, so I noticed you didn't say much about the sidewalks. So I have 3 quick questions about that. So out of curiosity, in St. Paul, who's responsible for the street trees and the sidewalks?
In the city overall, yes, thank you, Commissioner Harris. The city forestry and the Parks and Recreation Department is responsible for.
Okay. Secondly, in all these schematics, on the sidewalk side, I see people pushing strollers or jogging or walking dogs. What about those e-scooters? Where are they gonna go?
Great question. I think in the thank you, Commissioner, in the same.
Because people toss them all over the place,
Right.
That is true.
They do, absolutely. Well, the treadway, the thought would be that this treadway as a trail, a regional trail facility, that they would use this new facility primarily.
They'd share it with the bicycles then.
Correct,
And
not
the
the
e-bikes
sidewalks.
and all the other stuff, okay. And how will that be enforced? I mean, this is really a residential area. I mean, if you're calling it a regional trail, but there've been homes there for 150 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as enforcement, I don't know that we have enforcement for e-bike policy unless you knows anything about that.
Well, no, I meant users.
Oh,
You know, what's
sorry.
gonna keep the bicyclists off the sidewalk or the e-scooters off the sidewalk?
Sure. Commissioner, it's a fantastic question. I think we look at users, and currently some people may bike on the sidewalk. That may happen as user preference. Our thought is that if you're creating a space that's more comfortable for bicyclists to move on, it provides more of an ability or more likelihood that they can use that separated spaces versus sidewalk. So again, we heard from many people that there's a concern about the way it is now and having many of these different modes being commingling, so to speak. So this is a way to designate that.
Commissioner, I would add, just on the scooters too, if we did identify them as a safety hazard or something that that needs to be addressed, there is geofencing that we have with that, within the agreement, for the scooters from Limes and others, so, we can essentially outlaw them in specific spaces if needed.
Yeah, because I will say, having lived in a larger metropolitan area for a long time, you know, just the trip and fall with the e-scooters and, you know, people on e-scooters using their cell phones, oblivious to what else is happening on a sidewalk. It's pretty scary.
Most of our e-scooter, I'll call it e-scooter drama, has happened within the regional park spaces, and we're still trying to figure out ways to best navigate those when they do come up, but definitely a variable to consider. Thank you for that.
But it looks good. I mean, it's a lovely corridor to walk. It's a really pretty area.
And not so much about the scooter thing, but when you're mentioning bicycles, that's also something that I know gets tricky to try to get too legislative about, because in particular, I frequently see cases where someone is walking on a sidewalk while their young child bicycles next to them, also on the sidewalk. And so it may make sense for some people to bike on a sidewalk when others don't, so it comes down to a lot of frequently having these different experiences in design can be more sensible than trying to figure out how to write a rule for it, because you end up missing stuff like that.
Right, and again, the town I used to live in, under 12, you could bike on a sidewalk.
Oh, so they actually had an age?
Yeah.
That's interesting, I haven't seen that.
But some
Yeah.
12-year-olds look 16, some 16-year-olds look 10.
Yeah, good luck
You know,
figuring
I
that out
mean,
in the field, yeah. Jeremy?
No, I'm just thinking about now a policeman trying to check a child's ID to ensure that they're within the legal age.
Can I see your driver's license that you don't have because you're 12?
That
Pulling
just,
over scooters.
no, thank you. I was thinking about snow removal. You know, St. Paul has a reputation, and I'm curious how this would be changed in Summit Avenue with the redesign. Like, would you have post-plow passes, for example, to ensure that the cast-offs are not blocking the bike lane and sidewalk? But what would that look like to address that concern?
Chair Commissioner, that's a great question. Point well taken, obviously, with the last couple days and what we're dealing with here in St. Paul. But yes, there'd be some required dedicated equipment that would need to be purchased to maintain this to the caliber that it needs to be maintained.
Because you end up, you were saying also some things, even if they're in kind of the same spot, lifting them up, so then that's gonna have to be maintained by a totally separate vehicle, right?
Correct.
And do you I get the term used for the kind of diagram of things laid out side to side. Is there actually room in that to store the snow that we need to, or are you gonna end up having to like cart snow off places?
We probably have to cart snow off places. I mean, we do that now. We're running out of places right
Okay.
now to put snow, but yeah, we'd have to move it to a different location.
Okay.
Could get those Canadian melters.
Yeah, there you go.
Have you seen these things?
Yeah, oh yeah,
So-
they're like giant kettles where they go and fire, you know, put it in a giant dump truck kind of thing, and then just melt it all down.
It's hooked up to the
Pour
storm
out.
sewer.
Yeah, they've done that
So
there was,
In DC they
there
did
were
it.
1 or 2 years that they brought a couple of those out to some of the malls. I think Rosedale had one for a while.
Yeah,
It's
when
intense.
I was in DC for the snowpocalypse snowmageddon stuff, and they had people from Ontario come down with their Canadian snow melters and help out with managing all the snow that the capital suddenly had to deal with, didn't have the infrastructure for, so. That's a possibility too, is a snow melter, I don't know what that looks like, but.
I will bring Canadian snow melters back with me.
Or what if instead of bringing the melters from Canada, we just put the snow on trucks and brought it down to southern states and like, here, enjoy snow.
Oh yeah, California water problem solved.
There you go.
Bottle,
Yeah.
You can't have our water, but you can have our snow if you melt it yourself. Oh.
That's great. I do appreciate you all coming though and sharing with us the status. I think that's really fantastic to get updates and information so that it's not the first time we see it when the plan comes forward.
I'm curious, you mentioned some of the things that you saw as your highlights after the 60% comments. Were there things that you got in the comment period of your 60% draft that you were not already aware of or anticipating from your original engagement stuff before that draft?
You know, I don't know that there was anything new and surprising, you know, the themes just reinforced themselves in that process. It was helpful, there are, you know, details people picked up, you know, which is great, and we can think about how we're catching those. But I think that many of the themes we had heard and we can put a finer point to it, so.
And I'm also curious, I saw this was, I'm sure, oversimplified for PowerPoint, but you had mentioned support and opposition for a regional trail in this area. Do we actually have significant opposition to the concept of a regional facility in the sense that it should have come up when we had system planning putting a search corridor here? Or is it more opposition to the particular implementation design details that go into this plan?
Yeah, Chair, I think, great question, I think both, I would say, we've heard, you know, why here, why now, what else has the process that preceded this looked at? And then I think also the detail level of this, you know, this is not the way to do what we're trying to do as a regional facility.
Just bring that up, because also thinking of what I was saying with the Point Douglas thing, I'm guessing that while yes, we do public hearings and things like that for it, the system planning stage where we say we'd like to put a trail roughly here doesn't tend to get much community attention most of the time. But then when you come out and say, hey, we want to make it 12 feet right here, then people are suddenly involved. And sometimes that's not the right time for them to comment on, well, shouldn't the alignment corridor be this way instead of this way? And I don't know if there's anything but that kind of comes back to also us, in addition to the implementing agencies, of can we do anything better at the system plan stage to get people more involved and aware so that when it gets to this stage, it's not a surprise.
Chair, I think that's an excellent point and something that we've been really trying to focus on with constituents who inquire about the process, about where it begins and where it ends, and all the different government agencies involved and the bureaucracy, right, of how we get here. And that can be challenging to explain for many, so trying to.
We could probably have like a 3-hour YouTube video that's just like Emmett saying, this is how plan happens.
People would be really fascinated with it.
It wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I don't know how you make it, but
Kenna
yeah.
already did some of that presentation to us.
Well, yeah, so that maybe once we figure out how to do it for ourselves, that'll help us create something for the public at some point, because yeah, we did it for ourselves and said this needs to be improved.
Just record it.
Yeah, maybe.
Just recorded once.
Yeah, well, one of the longer I'm involved in doing government planning stuff, the more aware you become of how much the average person has no idea of what the different moving parts are and who they should talk to when if they want to get involved. And I don't know how we better communicate that. That's tricky. So I'm just talking out loud.
I think the funding aspects too, and what regional solicitation is, and how long it takes, and like all that stuff, I think is very important for that user.
So if anyone watching has suggestions on how that could be done, feel free to email me. Anthony.
Yeah, well, I think that this has been a process that's gotten a lot of attention, and I think additionally, I think that the team from the city has also done additional outreach and been intentional, and I think I will say I've been involved with this for years, and this is the one project that I feel like I've had the most intimate outreach and engagement and really thought about. And so I think it actually, there's a lot here that I think there's just opportunities here. And I think that one of the things that is happening, and I think really your point about people understanding the process is really important, because I don't think we always do. But I do think that the net impact on people's lived experience makes them fearful. That part of this, really has been, it's been interesting to see the different, different personalities and different people in different places kind of pop up around this idea. And I will say that I've had people from some near communities call me and say, whatever they did at the Summit Avenue engagement stuff was great, they need to do more of that. Right? And I've had people who say, that engagement on Summit Avenue, they didn't do anything. They just do whatever the hell they want, right? And we know that's not necessarily the case. The one thing that I would say is that this has been interesting because, personally, like I said, I am, even as I'm on the other extreme personally, as we look at this, I'm just tempering my own things because I just said to this team recently, if it was up to me, we could do away with all the parking and we could solve every challenge we have. And people think that's crazy talk, right? Simultaneously, there's something happening, and I really appreciate this teams. And I think if anybody really is bored and has nothing to do, and you read the 60, there's a lot of stuff in there. And one of the things that comes out in fits and starts, and there are little elements of it, and I would say to the team, is really the experts we have on our teams in the city, in the park system, that are arborists themselves. I think that establishing our expertise as urban arborists and our work through Public Works, working with curb, movement, impact on trees. Like I feel like in this process we have to establish that and for ourselves and for the community, and then we really begin to actively state and I think in this particular project, and I'll back up one thing and I'll say, Cicely, you're absolutely right, there have been houses here forever, but I will tell you, most people think that there have been bike lanes here forever. St. Paul is not, St. Paul, you know what I mean, they're just there, and people have biked and walked, and Summit Avenue is a destination for this community, and at this point, post-COVID and post-racial reckoning, I'm gonna say Summit Avenue has been a place where people have done self-care. That it is integral to this kind of regional well-being strategy that people have, because it's in smack dab in the middle of the city. It is a tremendous east-west, there's so many things about this if you live in the city. And so, I was back to this thing, I think that in terms of taking care of people's fears, I think we do have to actively establish these people, the experts we have on this team, as the ones we turn to and can trust their opinion relative to potential impact relative to the tree canopy. Because, like I said, I've sat with people and they've given me lots of different things, and I look them in the eye and just say, what are we really getting at? Like, what are we really gonna get to? And so I do think as we develop the plan, I feel like it would be in our interest. And again, what I say is, I say this because I feel like the team, there are elements of this all throughout the report. And when you're dealing and talking with them, it comes up that us maintaining the integrity of the tree canopy, this 150-year legacy of what we've created on this boulevard is top priority for them as well. And we have to really establish the markers of that priority. Does that make, I don't know if that makes sense. But we do that, and I think that really is critically important. And if you dig into it, you'll see the multiple ways and the different systems that we're using, lots of different bike lane expertise and design in this. And I like to say with communities that let's really talk about our priorities and the aspirations we have, and then we have to design for that. And so that's what I really would love to also see in this, is this acknowledgement of those challenges and how we're designing for that, right? How we're designing for that and caring for that, and how we're using technology to solve for those, those challenges for us, and really kind of begin to do that. And then the last thing, and I appreciate this team for accepting this, and I feel like all of us are thinking about this, is that we, in terms of the work we do, I think we have an opportunity around culture, because what I'm also saying to people is, are you willing to go down to 15 miles an hour speed limit, right? Because I do think we have a culture of mobility that says whoever's moving the fastest with the most momentum and the most confidence has the most rights. And the biggest reason people go on the sidewalks is because they want to be safe. And at the same time, it's the least safe place for them in some regards, relative to being visible and relative to turning traffic, I mean, there are lots of reasons why you should not be there, and there's one why you should, because it feels safe for you, right? So as we design this, I would really love us to lean into that opportunity because of the impact of this throughway on people's lives, on where people travel, where people are, and there's nothing better than a nice, multifunctional system that goes where people live and where they go. But I think we can influence our whole system. And your priorities around, plowing, bikeways first, maybe that's one of the things that's gonna come out of this too, is that we're gonna eventually clean our bike system first. Our biking and walking system for people first, so. Those are the couple just things that I felt were really important, and because there's really been a tremendous amount of really good work done on this, and I think it'd just be great to get to those, addressing those things and really acknowledging, hearing those priorities, but it really is a tremendous opportunity for us, and again, if you get a chance, it's a 60% plan, and it's actually a pretty amazing document, and I think that we can do more to make it digestible for people by organizing around those key priorities that came out of your engagement, and then doing direct points of connection to that, you know what I mean? Like whatever the top 4 or 5 was, but then allowing people to jump through it quickly and see the design element or the policy element or the investment element or the equipment element that really solves that for them. Because I think it's just a great opportunity for us in terms of just the importance of this to our whole, just the way we live in St. Paul. And that's not really, an overstatement. In terms of the impact of this on the bike system we're developing in St. Paul. So I really think it's good work at this point, and thank you for that. And we're gonna stay engaged with the community.
I think one thing that I'll mention, just to kind of speak for some of our own interests as MPOSC, because this is something that's getting so much interest from the local community about some very specific local stuff, design feature kind of things, make sure that the final plan also still remembers that this is a plan for a regional facility and covers thoroughly what makes us something that is a regional facility and serving that purpose as opposed to just being a really nice local facility, and how does it tie into the big thing, how is it gonna draw non-local visits and really fit into that, and what will make it successful as a regional thing, in addition to making sure that we're all addressing all the local stuff that has to happen. So I'm not even saying that that's a shortcoming of the current document or anything, just something to keep in mind, because obviously a lot of the focus is on some other stuff. Anyone else?
I found it interesting that this is the second time that there's been a major transportation overhaul of this corridor. First the horse to the automated vehicles, and then the vehicles to the bikes. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
You see all those carriage houses and everything along the way.
Yeah.
I doubt there are lessons from that transition that could help us here, but
Yeah, there's probably fewer horses.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Summit also probably was close to at least one streetcar line at some point too.
Oh, good call.
If not actually hosting one.
Just really interesting.
Also, just a general thought, I really appreciate seeing that you had multiple draft and public comment stages. You only actually have to have one, but it said you had 3. So I think that kind of thing is really useful. Again, getting back to the people don't know who do they talk to when, well, if you add some extra times that they can comment, it's easier for them to happen upon one of them, so that's nice. Anything else? Do you guys have any more questions for us that you're hoping to get out of our feedback today?
The timing is perfect, so thank you for the opportunity to come between 60 and 90%. Mary's working
It really is.
incredibly hard,
You-
so
Well
this
seen.
input is really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That next comment period is all of February.
Yes, so for anyone watching online, they have an actual comment period opening again February 1st, I think it was.
Thank you.
That brings us to the report section of our meeting. Make this fast. One, I will acknowledge that in theory, we were supposed to have a business item at today's meeting for appointing a vice chair for the year. However, that's a little bit complicated by the fact that half of our commission has their terms ending this month, including literally everybody present here today except me. So it seems to make a little bit more sense to wait until we have a chance to talk to some of the other people whose terms aren't ending, as well as get a little bit more sense of what might be happening for appointments into those seats before filling in that. And similarly, there's probably some bylaws editing that we should do later this year that I will be looking into more and probably coming back with. And there was, in several places today, some different language for a particular term of use that you can put in your report if you would like.
Sure.
All right, any other commissioner reports? Yes, Jeremy?
Legacy amendment,
Yes,
it expires.
yeah,
This is the session for it to get done, if it's going to get done.
call your legislator.
Yeah, renewal has to happen this year.
Yes.
Gonna happen.
So for those who don't know, the legacy funding comes from a constitutional amendment that does have a sunset date. So what we would need is for the legislature has to pass a bill to put something onto the ballot for renewal of the constitutional amendment. So that is something that is done by both houses of the legislature. We don't have any step from the governor in that. It's not signed like a bill there. It's just both houses of the legislature, but it can't come from the general public. We don't have citizen initiative stuff. It's the legislature has to put it on the ballot to have a constitutional amendment renewal.
Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, I think we're talking about the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund and
Sorry,
not the legacy.
yes.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, no, legacy, we're up
The
to 2034.
Yes.
This is.
We have two different constitutional
I was
amendments
getting
related to
worried.
parks funding.
you're right.
Yes, we're talking about the ENRTF one from the 80s. That is the one that's coming up, not the 2008 legacy. Sorry.
Jeremy, who sits on.
I
This is what happens when you go past
mixed up
6.
with the discussion that we had earlier.
Yes.
I wrote the wrong one down.
So if you enjoy parks funding that goes to all of those projects that people were presenting earlier, that those ones are the legacy ones, but ENRTF also does similar kinds of stuff, particularly for our Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund grants. A bunch of those come from that money. So if you want us to be able to acquire land, we need to renew that. Anybody else?
Someone brought up Silverwood Park earlier, and it actually is an amazing park, but just an opportunity for everyone is, I believe the Great Northern Festival is actually doing a number of things at Silverwood Park. I think the weekend of the, I'm looking at John like, dude, you don't have to schedule?
Come on.
But I think, I think that it's a look up the Great Northern Festival. There's a number of really cool events, and Silverwood Park is featuring an ice fishing art installation with Seitu Jones. They're doing what they're doing is they're doing a Japanese printing technique using live fish and ice fishing. So it's just something. But there also is a Wim Hof. If you are familiar with that, the Wim Hof system of ice bathing, breathing, using cold therapy that is happening there, and they're doing fat bike clinics. I mean, it's actually, but anyway, Silverwood Park. So in the Great Northern Festival, look it up last week, and it's all outdoors. It's really celebrating the outdoors and winter. It's celebrating winter as an opportunity. So
January 25th to February 5th.
there you go. And part of it is the Winter Carnival and the local festival and the pond hockey tournament are all aspects of that. So look it up, it's pretty amazing.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Emma?
As a demonstration of my appreciation to the commissioners staying till 20 to 7, I know Cecily's gotta get on the road, I'll be short. But I appreciate you, thank you for coming. We do have MPOSC interviews for districts D, E, F, G, and H. So 5 of our districts are open. We're gonna hold those interviews next Thursday. Stay tuned. for the outcome of those proceedings. But again, we really appreciate all of you and your commitment to this commission. I just wanted to mention that the legislative session began this week. You're all aware of that. This is a biennial budgeting year. This is a very important year for the regional park system. The governor, who is our, director, will be coming out with his budget recommendation on January 24th. This will include, or let me go with hopefully include, because we make no promises, but regional park system requests. So I'll have more information about that in February. But your engagement on the legislative session would be appreciated for the coming session. So those are my updates, thanks.
And keeping in mind that you might have different representatives than you did before because of redistricting.
Thank goodness.
I knew who mine were before, now they're new people that I've never met. To go make some introductions. So, all right. Well, thank you for staying so long. Good luck with your drive, Cecily. Sorry for keeping you.
Cecily, do you need to walk through to your parking garage? Okay.